Now, understand, nobody is talking about creating an entirely new system. We are simply talking about plugging holes, sealing a porous system that isn't working as well as it should. If you want to buy a gun, whether it's from a licensed dealer or a private seller, you should at least have to pass a background check to show you're not a criminal or someone legally prohibited from buying on. And that's just common sense. During our roundtable discussion with Governor Hickenlooper, who I know was in the midst of this passionate debate about the legislation here in Colorado, and some people said, well, background checks aren't going to stop everybody. And the governor was the first one to acknowledge, yes, they won't stop everybody. But as he pointed out, statistically, there are a whole bunch of folks who have been stopped. As a consequence of background checks, law enforcement has been able to stop people. Who have been convicted of murder from getting a gun. People who are under restraining orders for having committed violent domestic abuse from getting a gun. In a couple of cases the governor mentioned to me, law enforcement has actually been able to arrest people who came to pick up their gun because they were criminals, wanted. So this does work. And, by the way, if you're selling a gun, wouldn't you want to know who you're selling it to? Wouldn't you want to know? Wouldn't you want in your conscience to know that the person you're selling to isn't going to commit a crime? So these enhanced background checks won't stop all gun crimes, but they will certainly help prevent some. This is common sense. And, by the way, most gun owners, more than 80%, agree this makes sense. More than 70% of NRA members agree. %90 of the American people agree. So there's no reason we can't do this unless politics is getting in the way. There's no reason we can't do this. As soon as next week, every senator will get a chance to vote on a proposal to help strengthen school. Safety and help people struggling with mental health problems get the treatment that they need. As soon as next week, every senator will get to vote on whether or not we should crack down on folks who buy guns as part of a scheme to arm criminals. That would keep more guns off the streets and out of the hands of people who are intent on doing harm. And it would make life a whole lot easier and safer for the people behind me, police officers. Every senator will get a say on whether or not we should keep weapons of war and high-capacity ammunition magazines that facilitate mass killings off our streets. The type of assault rifle used in Aurora, for example, when paired with a high-capacity magazine. Has one purpose: to pump out as many bullets as possible, as fast as possible. It's what allowed that gunman to shoot 70 people and kill 12 in a matter of a few minutes. I don't believe that weapons designed for theaters of war have a place in movie theaters. Most Americans agree with that. Most of these ideas are not controversial. Right now, 90% of Americans 90%. Support background checks that will keep criminals and people who have been found to be a danger to themselves or others from buying a gun. More than 80% of Republicans agree. Most gun owners agree. Think about it. How often do 90% of Americans agree on anything? And yet, there are already some senators back in Washington floating the idea that they might use obscure procedural stunts to prevent or delay any of these votes on reform. Think about that. They're not just saying they'll vote no on the proposal that most Americans support. They're saying they'll do everything they can to avoid even allowing a vote. On a proposal that the overwhelming majority of the American people support. They're saying your opinion doesn't matter. We knew from the beginning that change wouldn't be easy. And we knew that there would be powerful voices that would do everything they could to run out the clock. Change the subject, ignore the majority of the American people. We knew they'd try to make any progress collapse under the weight of fear and frustration. Or maybe people would just stop paying attention. The only way this time will be different is if the American people demand that this time it must be different that this time. We must do something to protect our communities and our kids. We need parents, we need teachers, we need police officers, we need pastors. We need hunters and sportsmen, Americans of every background to say, We've suffered too much pain and care too much about our children to allow this to continue. We're not going to just wait for the next Newtown or the next Aurora before we act. And I genuinely believe that's what the overwhelming majority of Americans. I don't care. What party they belong to, that's what they want. They just want to see some progress. It was interesting, during the conversation, a number of people talked about the trust issue. Part of the reason it's so hard to get this done is because both sides of the debate sometimes don't listen to each other. The people who take absolute positions on these issues, on both sides. Sometimes aren't willing to concede even an inch of ground. And so one of the questions we talked about was, how do you build trust? How do you rebuild some trust? And I told the story about two conversations I had. The first conversation was when Michelle came back from doing some campaigning out in rural Iowa. And we were sitting at dinner, and she had been to like a big county. A lot of driving out there, a lot of farmland. And she said, if I was living out in a farm in Iowa, I'd probably want a gun, too. If somebody just drives up into your driveway and you're not home, you don't know who. These people are, and you don't know how long it's going to take for the sheriffs to respond. I can see why you'd want some guns for protection. That's one conversation. I had another conversation just a couple of months ago with a mom from Chicago actually. Evanston, Illinois, whose son had been killed in a random shooting. And she said, "You know, I hate it when people tell me that my son was shot because he was in the wrong place at the wrong time. He was in the right place. He was on his way to school. He wasn't in the wrong place. He was exactly where he was supposed to be." Now, both those things are true. And sometimes we're so divided between rural and urban. And folks whose hunting is part of their lives and folks whose only experience with guns is street crime. And the two sides just talk past one another. And more than anything, what I want to just emphasize is there are good people on both sides of this thing. But we have to be able to put ourselves in the other person's shoes. If you're a hunter, if you're a sportsman, if you have a gun in your house for protection, you've got to understand what it feels like for that mom whose son was randomly shot. And if you live in an urban area and you're worried about street crime, you've got to understand what it might be like if you grew out on a ranch and your dad had been taking you hunting all your life. And we had a couple of sportsmen in our conversation today. And I thought one of them said something very important. He said, "All my experiences with guns have been positive. But I realize that for others, all their experiences about guns have been negative. Well, that's a start, right? If we start listening to each other. Then we should be able to get something done that's constructive. We should be able to get that done. One last thing I'm going to mention is that during this conversation I hope you don't mind me quoting you, Joe. Joe Garcia, I thought, also made an important point, and that is that the opponents of some of these common sense laws have ginned up fears among responsible gun owners that have nothing to do with what's being proposed and nothing to do with the facts, but feeds into the suspicion about government. You hear some of these quotes, "I need a gun to protect myself from the government." We can't do background checks because the government is going to come take my guns away. Well, the government is us. These officials are elected by you. They are elected by you. I am elected by you. I am constrained. As they are constrained, by a system that our founders put in place. It's a government of and by and for the people. And so, surely, we can have a debate that's not based on the notion somehow that you're elected. Representatives are trying to do something to you other than potentially prevent another group. Of families from grieving the way the families of Aurora or Newtown or Columbine have grieved. We've got to get past some of the rhetoric that gets perpetuated that breaks. Down trust and is so over the top that it just shuts down all discussion. And it's important for all of us when we hear that kind of talk to say, hold on a second. If there are any folks who are out there right now who are gun owners, and you've been hearing that somehow somebody is taking away your guns, get the facts. We're not proposing a gun registration system, we're proposing background checks for criminals.